October 8, 1871. In the space of a single night, more American territory was destroyed by fire than in any other event of the 19th century. Not in one location, not through one cause, not in one state, in 5 locations across 3 states simultaneously, with the fires beginning at approximately the same hour on the same evening across distances that make simultaneous accidental ignition from a common cause geometrically implausible under any conventional model of how fires start and spread. The Great Chicago Fire is the event that American history remembers. It is the event that has its own chapter in every serious treatment of the period. 17,450 buildings destroyed across 3.5 square miles of the most densely developed commercial district in the American Midwest. 300 people dead. 100,000 homeless. The fire that consumed Chicago on the night of October 8th and into October 9th, 1871, is one of the most thoroughly documented disasters in American history. The popular legend of Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern in a barn on DeKoven Street is one of the most durable origin stories in American folklore. So durable that the Chicago City Council did not officially retract it until 1997. More than a century after it had been established as historically inaccurate. What American history does not remember with comparable clarity is what was happening on the same night 200 miles to the north. The Peshtigo Fire. It ignited in the forests of northeastern Wisconsin on the same evening as the Chicago Fire. It burned 1.2 million acres of forest and farmland in a single night. It consumed the town of Peshtigo so completely that nothing of the built environment survived. It killed between 1,500 and 2,500 people. The exact number is unknown because all of the local records that would have documented who lived in the affected communities were destroyed in the fire itself. The Peshtigo Fire remains, by every measure, the deadliest wildfire in the recorded history of the United States. More people died in Peshtigo on the night of October 8, 1871, than died in the Great Chicago Fire and its entire immediate aftermath combined. Most Americans have never heard of it. On the same night, fire destroyed Holland, Michigan, fire destroyed Port Huron, Michigan, fire destroyed Manistee, Michigan. A survey conducted by a Chicago newspaper in the weeks following the disaster identified 37 individual fire areas across 3 states, all of which were burning on the same evening. The official explanation for this pattern is meteorological. The summer and fall of 1871 had produced an extended drought across the Great Lakes region. The forests of Wisconsin and Michigan and the wooden buildings of Chicago had been rendered exceptionally vulnerable to fire by months of below normal precipitation. Strong southwest winds on the evening of October 8th provided the conditions under which multiple fires, each with its own local ignition cause, could expand rapidly and simultaneously into the catastrophic conflagrations that the historical record documents. The simultaneous appearance of major fires across 3 states was a tragic coincidence of weather and combustible conditions rather than a single event with a single cause. That explanation has been the official position since the fires occurred. It is the explanation reproduced in every general history of the period. It is meteorologically plausible, and it has never fully answered the specific questions that the specific evidence raises. Here is what the explanation does not address. The Peshtigo Fire did not behave like a drought-fueled wildfire spread by wind. The eyewitness accounts collected by journalists, church officials, and government investigators in the weeks immediately following the disaster describe fire behavior that is inconsistent with the model of a conventional forest fire accelerated by drought conditions and strong winds. Multiple witnesses described seeing balls of fire falling from the sky before the main fire front arrived at their location. Multiple witnesses described fires igniting simultaneously in locations separated by rivers and cleared fields that should have interrupted the spread of a surface fire moving through forest. Multiple witnesses described fire moving in directions that were inconsistent with the prevailing wind patterns documented for the evening. Multiple witnesses described trees exploding rather than burning in the sequential way that progressive combustion produces, as though they were being exposed to an intense and instantaneous heat source rather than the advancing front of a conventional fire. These accounts were collected from multiple independent witnesses across a wide geographic area by investigators who were not working from any predetermined theoretical framework. They are in the historical record. They have been treated by mainstream scholarship as evidence of the psychological effects of an extreme traumatic event rather than as accurate descriptions of anomalous physical phenomena. In 2004, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics published a peer-reviewed paper examining a hypothesis that had first been proposed by an independent researcher in 1883. The hypothesis was that fragments from Biela's comet, which had been observed to break apart in 1846 and whose predicted orbital path would bring debris near Earth in 1872, had entered the atmosphere over the Great Lakes region on the night of October 8, 1871. The paper concluded that the hypothesis was scientifically plausible and that the available evidence was more consistent with a cometary debris event than with the conventional meteorological explanation. The paper was not widely publicized. The official explanation was not revised. Set aside for a moment the question of what caused the fires. Consider instead what the fires destroyed, and what the destruction of those specific things made possible. Chicago in October of 1871 was a city in the final stages of a 15-year engineering project unlike anything else in American history. The city had been built on marshy ground barely 4 feet above the level of Lake Michigan. Its sewage systems did not drain, its streets flooded regularly. Its drinking water was contaminated by proximity to its own waste. The solution that the city's engineers had designed and been implementing since 1855 was radical. Raise the entire street level of the commercial district by between 4 and 14 feet. Lift every building, every block, every structure in the downtown core to the new street level. Bury the original ground floor infrastructure beneath the new street level and build on top of it. It had been accomplished. Building by building, block by block, over 15 years. Buildings lifted on jack screws while occupants remained inside. The original street level of Chicago, the level at which the city had been built, with everything that had existed at that level before the raising was buried beneath the new street level across the entire commercial district. The fire that swept through Chicago on the night of October 8th destroyed the raised city almost completely. It destroyed the buildings that had been constructed on the new elevated street level. It destroyed the engineering records and property records and business records and personal records that documented the raising process and the people who had lived through it. It did not destroy what was beneath the raised street level. The buried original ground floor infrastructure, the brick and stone foundations of buildings that had been lifted and left in place below the new street level, accessible only from below, survived the fire. Because they were underground. When Chicago rebuilt after the fire, it rebuilt on the raised level. The buried infrastructure beneath was not excavated and examined, it was built over. The records of what had existed at the original ground level before the raising, the records that would have documented what was there before the city lifted itself, burned in the fire. The physical remains of what had been at the original level were sealed beneath the new construction, and the one document that would have allowed a systematic examination of the rebuilt city's population against the pre-fire population, the 1890 census, was taken 19 years later and then destroyed in 1933 before the analytical tools to perform that examination had been developed. The fires across 3 states on October 8, 1871, destroyed local records throughout the affected region. Peshtigo left no documentary record of its pre-fire population because there was no pre-fire population documentation to survive. The Michigan towns that burned lost their municipal records, their church registers, their property deed books, their birth and death records. The fire that made October 8, 1871, the most destructive night in 19th century American history, simultaneously destroyed the local documentation that would have allowed researchers to establish precisely what had been there before. Which communities? Which populations? Which records? Which histories? The fires burned the cities, and the fires burned the evidence of what the cities had been. And the census that would have captured the rebuilt populations in the detail required to compare them against whatever pre-fire documentation had survived elsewhere was authorized for destruction in 1933, before that comparison was ever made. Maybe the official meteorological explanation is correct. Maybe the drought was severe enough and the wind was strong enough that the simultaneous ignition of catastrophic fires across 3 states on the same evening was a genuine coincidence of natural conditions rather than a single event with a single cause. Maybe the eyewitness accounts of anomalous fire behavior reflect the genuine perceptual distortions of extreme traumatic stress rather than accurate descriptions of anomalous physical phenomena. Maybe the 2004 AEA paper was an interesting scientific speculation that the available evidence does not actually support. Maybe the destruction of local records across 37 fire areas on the same night was simply the incidental consequence of fires that had no coordinated cause. Maybe the coincidence of the Chicago fire occurring precisely as the razed city was completing its transformation of its own buried infrastructure was exactly that. A coincidence. Maybe all of it is coincidence, but I keep returning to the specific shape of what was lost. The cities burned. The records of the cities burned. The buried infrastructure that predated the razed city survived. The census that would have allowed systematic analysis of the rebuilt populations was taken and then destroyed. The local records that would have allowed comparison against pre-fire population documentation were consumed along with everything else. The fires destroyed exactly the things whose destruction made the questions about what had been there before impossible to answer. Not some of those things. Not most of those things. All of those things. On the same night. October 8, 1871. 5 cities, 3 states, 37 fire areas. One night. The deadliest wildfire in American history occurring simultaneously with the most famous urban fire in American history, with the deadliest fire receiving a fraction of the historical attention given to the most famous one. Because the deadliest fire destroyed the records that would have documented it. And the most famous fire left enough survivors to generate the documentation that made it famous. The explanation that nobody fully accepts is still the official explanation. The records that would have allowed a definitive alternative to be established burned with everything else. And the question of what actually happened on October 8, 1871 is a question whose most relevant evidence was consumed by the event itself. If you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.